hope we are all doing good and we are all doing well. Like I've said, we have some previous classes regarding CSS and the HTML for designing a website. And of course, without wasting more time on this, so we'll be talking about the CSS. I'll be taking it from the start again. And basically, like I do say, I don't really like much about talking about the theory aspect of it, but the practical implementation of our codes and how to execute all those codes for a visual appealing website. Now, there are three, or let me say four basic category of, or let me say subheadings of CSS. Happens to be the basics that you guys need to know. And of course, the first one is the CSS syntax. We've talked about this before. We have the CSS selector. So we have CSS selector combination and how to load our CSS, like the type of CSS or the method of how we can use our CSS to style our website content. So these are the four great things that we need to understand for the basics implementation of our CSS on our website. So having understand this, we're talking of the CSS syntax. For the CSS syntax, we have the selector and we have the pair property with values. Uh, the selector is what we use to call on our element from the HTML or to identify our element on the HTML. So having understand that, so we use it to, or probably I say we use the selector to call our element from HTML directly to give it whatever styles that we want to give it. Then while the CSS selector, we have like three CSS selector. We have the element itself, we have the class, and we have the ID. So the element itself is when we have, let me see, uh, probably we have an H1 as our heading element or our heading tags for our typography in HTML. So you can call your H1 or H2 or H3 or whatever element that you want to style on your CSS. You can call it with their element name. So as we have the H1, you can have it called and give it a property of probably background color, a color, yeah, color or size. For instance, now we have H1 to be a typography element, like text element. So I can give it a color, I can increase the font size, I can reduce the font size, or whatever the case might be as a property. So having talked about the CSS like element, then we have the class. As we will have that H1 to be our element that we want to call on, we can actually declare or define an attribute of class in our HTML file for that H1. So the class can be given to be the title or the header or whatever the case might be or whatever you want to call it. So in your CSS file, or probably you are using the whatever method of styling I'll be using, so we discuss it in the further notes. So you can call it directly with that very class that you're giving to that element. Like for an example I have mentioned, we have H1 and we want to declare the attribute of a class, and that's your H1 element. So you can have it as a title. So you can revert to that very H1 element. Instead of calling it as H1, you can call it as the title in your CSS file. Then you can style it with whatever you want to style. Then we have the ID selector. The ID selector is more or less like the class selector. The only difference is that you can only declare just ID once for an element, but in the case of the class, you can have as many classes as possible for a particular or a single element. So then that is that about the CSS selectors. And of course, talking of the CSS selector combinations, that is when you have the multiple classes combined together to have a specific property and a given values to a particular element. So that is that about that. We'll be implementing the practical aspect of it while we write the code. Then how to load our CSS is basically the method of writing a CSS styling codes. Like I've said, or like we have done in the previous class, I explained to you that we have three methods of styling our website. But I talk about inline styling, the internal styling, and external styling. So the practical aspect of everything will be discussed and be projected to you in the screen shortly. Thank you.